And we're live, and welcome to Virtually Connecting ePatients. And today we are here to talk about YogaMOOC. And I'm here with one of my wonderful friends, and I will let everybody introduce themselves. I'm Rebecca Hogue, otherwise known as Becky. I'm a blogger, and I'm a PhD candidate studying e-patient health literacy. And I'm participating in YogaMOOC. I'll hand it over to Maha. Maha.
Hi, I'm Maha Bailey. I am here in Cairo. I work at the American University in Cairo, and I'm also participating in YogaMOOC. And I did some yoga when I was pregnant, and that was pretty much all the yoga I'd ever done. But I was really looking forward to YogaMOOC to help me sort of relax, because I think I've been a bit stressed lately. Laura and Sherry are much more expert in the art of yoga or such. So I'll let Laura introduce herself, and then Sherry. We'll start having our conversation.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Taub. I am here because Maha posted on Twitter that she was doing YogaMOOC, and I took that as an invitation to check it out myself. I teach, and I teach yoga as well, but I often live in what feel like two separate worlds, and yet experience a greater need to try to find the intersections of my yoga practice and teaching in the space of my digital pedagogy and my face-to-face teaching, where I teach here in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And so this seems like a good space to try to imagine some of those intersections.
Okay, I'm Sherry, and I am not participating in the YogaMOOC, so I'm very curious to hear about it. So I've been reading about it on Twitter, and so I'm looking forward to finding out more. Actually, I teach elementary physical education in Vienna, Austria, and so that means that I work with my body pretty much 5 days a week, every day, and so to do something extra on top of that is now something that I think I think carefully about before I engage. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I don't think I commented that I'm in Sunnyvale, California, because we're rather continentally dispersed. Yeah, so I guess the first question I had was sort of one of the things that we were looking at this week in YogaMOOC was sort of goals, and what is the goal or purpose in doing this. And I'll say that I came to YogaMOOC through Meha, who had posted about it on her blog, but I have a vague recollection of George Siemens mentioning it like a year ago or quite some time ago. And so it's great to see it come to fruition. But I'm curious to see what you guys are thinking so far.
So I'm going to go first there. And Laura's noticed what I've been saying about this, and I think Rebecca started me on it. So I first got into the MOOC and focused on the meditation exercises and the breathing exercises, because that's what I need. Like the yoga, I could, if the meditation does what I need, then I'll stick with that. And it was helping a little bit, except that I decided to try the yoga and I hurt my back. And I'm usually quite conscious of my limits, but I thought it was okay. And I stopped like about 10 minutes in, and I realized, first of all, in the email they were telling us about the course, they said, don't do anything beyond your hurt and feel free to stop and so on. But Rebecca was blogging about the fact that in yoga there should be there are modifications that you can do, and they didn't mention that. Nobody, like during the video, and nobody in the video was doing them, and they didn't talk about it extensively to let you know what you can do, because nobody wants to feel like they can't do something that looks easy on the screen. If it looked like someone was struggling on the screen, or if someone had told me, if you have a back issue, don't do that, it would have helped. And then Laura saw that, and she sent me several really useful links. I haven't finished going through them, but I did realize what I'd done wrong, at least. So I know that those poses are not for me, but it would have helped to sort of realize that I shouldn't have done them in the first place. So that's what I'm thinking.
I'm still kind of curious. I yoga and MOOC, and I'm thinking, how does this work? Is it really a series of videos and you kind of all agree, okay, let's all look at this one and try these things out? Or I need to hear more about how it works.
Well, it is built in the edX environment, and it is largely a series of videos, and videos that are both yoga instruction, so an hour-long yoga practice, as well as videos, interviews with experts with diverse viewpoints, definitions, and orientations to the practice of yoga, broadly construed to include the physical practices, but also mindfulness and meditation, and soon they're going to introduce us to yogic breathing. And, you know, I was thinking that so much of the work in online learning that I'm drawn to takes up this question of an embodied online learning, an embodied digital pedagogy, and a humanized digital pedagogy. So I went into this thinking, perhaps in a YogaMOOC, what they're really going to be foregrounding is the humanized, embodied element of online learning. And my experience so far is that there is a disconnect. I haven't seen the kinds of invitations for a more embodied online experience, especially for a YogaMOOC, that I was hopeful for. So even to ask us as learners at the outset about our experiences, about our yoga biographies, if we have them, to help set a stage for this MOOC. And I think that probably resulted in the kind of experience that Maha had that led to an injury. And so I'm thinking about what are the metaphors and extensions here to then bring back out of the YogaMOOC into other kinds of learning that engages the digital.
I guess.
Can you talk about the edge? Sorry, after Rebecca.
Well, I was just going to comment a bit on the idea of how in so many ways yoga is an individual practice. And so philosophically, I struggle with that in the MOOC concept because I want it to be a community practice. And so I don't know if Sherry or Laura, either of you have any sort of theories behind that concept of sort of the tension between the individual and the community, but I'm certainly feeling that lack of community.
Well, Rebecca, I'll comment that one of the reasons I teach yoga Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. is because I am drawn to some communal practice in yoga, the space of connecting with others in a shared practice. And I do think that while yoga is very individualized, it is grounded in the body practicing it, but that practice is enriched through the outward connection with other learners, with other practitioners. And I wonder if the other things we know about digital pedagogy could help construct some of that in this YogaMOOC, because an individual yoga practice in one's home is a certain experience, but to practice in community with others adds another dimension to that experience. So are there things we know from digital pedagogy that might move this towards more of a community experience?
I'm still sort of fascinated by it. I mean, maybe I have to check in now, because I'm really having a hard time thinking if it stays an individual practice because I'm at home in front of my device, and even knowing that several people are out there doing the thing, perhaps even at the same time, I can see where that I would struggle to find or have a sense of that community that you would find if you're in the same room doing the movements together, hearing the instructions, interpreting those instructions, and all in your own sense making, but able to see and be with each other. That is a very different thing. So
I have a question. Was the first session live? The 1 hour yoga class, did they run it live and then record it? No, it wasn't. So one of the things I was thinking of is, the whole idea of exercise videos or such has been around for a really long time. So the idea of exercising alone but in front of a screen and seeing other people doing it is normal. The thing that makes it a little bit less normal for me with yoga is that a lot of the poses don't allow you to look at the screen, and the actual act of looking at the screen could hurt you when you're in a particular pose. And if you don't know when the person says down dog or whatever, the sun salutation, whatever the thing is called, if you've never done it before, you need to, and what I did is I watched a little bit of the video before I started doing this stuff and rewinding and starting over. But I'm thinking that it's slightly different with yoga and it feels less. One of the other things I thought was interesting is that the instructor doesn't do the moves. I don't know if that's normal. I assume if someone all the time, like Sherry, she can't move every single time she's instructing other people to do it. It felt like, it's probably normal, but it just felt weird for some reason to me.
I ran into the very similar issue with the looking up thing in the meditation video, actually, because I was, eyes closed, sitting there meditating, and then the sound cut out. And I had to go look to see, and it was just that they had put a pause in the video, but because when they did that, like in order to allow for 1 minute of breathing or whatever, it cut the background sound out. And because it had been raining or whatever when they were recording the other video, there was this constant background sound, and then suddenly it got silent. And I thought, something's wrong. Is my thing, am I getting the loading screen or something not loading? And I had to, and so I broke my meditation, and I had to stop it to look up to make sure that it was still playing before I realized that it wasn't, that wasn't going on. So there's some interesting technology challenges with that. But I just, I wonder, like, it's funny because when we write, like I'm working on my PhD, and I have a Facebook group with people in my cohort, and we say, is anyone else dissertating right now? And we'll have that sort of community where we're all alone writing, and yet we're writing at the same time. But I don't think that translates to the physical the way it does to the mental.
I have to absolutely agree. I can't imagine that if I'm doing anything physical, just for myself, or that I can't do that and tweet and let you know, hey, I'm doing this, and are you doing it with me? Or it simply, I can't do that, and I can't do both. Right? I can't be in those two places at the same time, and that's something that I'm very cognizant of, because I notice ever more that when I am doing something, I went for a short walk today, that I'm thinking about tweeting, about what I would tweet, or what I want to say, or what I want to write next. But it stays in me for that time being. And so it's a really interesting conundrum, and to think about how the technology would impact your practice. Just exactly as you described, right? Just simply, okay, wait, okay, I'm meditating, it's silent. Is something's right? It's disorienting. So I think it's a really interesting challenge, and so I think I will have to kind of check it out for myself, just to kind of see how this works. Maha, you had a question that you wanted to look at.
I have a question, but I'm also just going to respond to this whole sense of community or not. When I heard about, I think I was in the process of trying to find a way to de-stress anyway when this came about, so I just decided to do it. But something did switch for me when Rebecca and Autumn and Laura and a few other people I know said they would do it. And when they said they would do it with me, in the sense, you know, they're not just doing it, but it's the idea of doing it together. Even though we're not doing the actual yoga together, but we're having an experience. It's like reading the same book.
Mm-hmm.
You're never actually sitting there reading the book together. You could do that, but you could convene occasionally on a book club or ask a question about a particular thing. So this is kind of how it feels to me. I think Laura saying particular things and sending me useful links has been, it's not the same kind of thing that would happen if we were in the same room together. She'd be like, no, don't do that move, or, you know, but it was some asynchronous form of support to the learning that isn't physical. And again, Rebecca and I were DMing about certain things, and so it feels communal in a different way than a yoga class would have felt. I'm the kind of person who's comfortable exercising freely on my own or with somebody, or having my daughter with me. And all these different permutations are fine. I think Laura wants to say something, and then I'll ask a question.
Well, what I was recalling is that your tweeting and posting about taking this course, what drew me in was not just the yoga, but it was also your sharing that you're very stressed out, that you are recognizing you need to do something to find some more balance. And that is what resonated with me, because throughout the entire semester, the people with whom I work and myself have felt, to use Kate Bull's term that she shared at DigPed, unmoored. Unmoored from, ungrounded from a sense that there's any way for us to be working together and in our place of work in a less frenzied, less reactive way. So the invitation was less about the MOOC itself and more about others are experiencing this too. I know it's not my own personal failing that I'm just not working smart enough, or I'm not personally just disorganized. There is something that has to do with the systems in which we work and the cultures in which we live that are contributing to this struggle to feel anchored in the work, anchored in our identities, anchored in your own breath. So the possibility to connect with you and others in that effort is what was the invitation to me. The fact that it's yoga matters, of course, but had you said, I'm going to read this book, I might have taken up that invitation as well.
And I felt hugged, you know, and it's not, it helps that I know Laura and Rebecca feels, but just having that I think my well-being improved just before YogaMOOC even started, just because I knew I had that support system. The thing that I wanted to ask, and again, I think there's a lot of connections with pedagogy in general with this. In yin yoga that Laura was talking about, she said there's a notion of the edge, is that the right word? And I was just thinking that it resonates a lot with learning as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that, and where I'm trying to figure out where that is in this MOOC, because I'm not seeing it.
Right. So I came to yin yoga pretty late in my yoga practice, which started in grad school as a way to survive grad school. And I was all about the rigorous yoga, the strengthening yoga. I really wanted a practice that was very, just physical, and I felt like I was exerting myself, and that kind of practice doesn't suit my body anymore. It doesn't suit my intent anymore. And so yin yoga, it was a opportunity to slow down in the practice and to experience yoga more deeply what is often kind of described as feeling the poses from the inside out, and with a kind of mindfulness. And the idea of playing with the edge, playing at your edge, is being self-aware enough to know that you're doing something physical, you're in a pose, and you're mindful not to push too far, and mindful to develop that awareness of where the boundary is between something that is challenging and stretching you, but not something that is beyond your current capability. It's like this experience of, aha, that's a direction that I want to explore, but these are the things I need to experience before I can get there. And where I am right now at this edge is where I belong. And I thought it was really curious, Maha, when you suggested, is that like the zone of proximal development? Kind of. And a good teacher or a more experienced peer would know how to help guide you to that edge and be a support, the kind of support that allows you to grow beyond that edge as you're able.
Wow, thanks for that, Laura. That resonates really deeply with me, and I think about my work with kids, and thinking about generally, physical education. Often for many people has a negative connotation, that people have had terrible experiences, and often when I talk to parents about their children, I hear their stories. They tell me their stories about PE. So a lot of what I think I do is kids. I mean, most of my kids they're happy, they're healthy, they're able. I work with an extremely able population. But still, my point is having kids feel comfortable to try things, to explore, to feel that okay, I'm a little scared of this, but I'm going to try it anyway. And so really, I feel like that's a huge part of what it's about. And so this notion of edge that really captures, it feels like a lot of what I do in my just day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute teaching.
The question is, when you're doing it in groups, how do you allow for each person to go at their own pace without someone feeling like left out or falling behind? Sorry, Rebecca, you were going to say something.
It's okay. We'll talk to yours first, and then I'll come back.
Sherry, you're muted.
Yeah. I guess what I do is, first of all, I suppose I leave options. So often we work with different types of equipment. So if we're working on tossing and catching, it might be to, it says, okay, toss and catch to yourself in a space. I might have different options for catching. You can maybe have a softball, or maybe a scarf, or maybe a club, and then give kids a chance to switch around. So options, and other things like when we do stretching, I try to delegate it as much as possible to the students. So either I have a group of them, 3 of them lead the stretching. So in first grade, they might do that. And each of them leads 3 stretches, and then sometimes they get stuck and someone helps them out. Those are the kinds of things that I want kids to have some sense that they get to choose some things, that it's not all Mrs. Spalett said you have to. and also to recognize that there are different ways of doing things. That even when we're talking about tossing and catching, that you're catching, you might have a difficult time tossing it high. So just, if you can kind of put your hands around it, hey, great, okay, that's a catch. So I think it's about creating an environment that allows for things. We can all be doing the same thing, tossing and catching, but it may look very different from student to student, and that's okay. And it's not a definitive like, oh, well, you passed catching today and you didn't, right? So it's, yeah, hope that helps.
I think that actually comes a lot to what we saw missing in that yoga video. In the video was that we saw everyone doing the same thing. And I think that as adults, taking it into the adult environment, we see too much of the right or wrong way of doing things. We've gone through this process for so much of our education that there is one way. There is a right way, and there is and every other way is a wrong way. And so how do we reframe and retrain adults, especially in the physical activity realms, I think in particular. I just think that's in particularly problematic. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But I just, trying to get more exercise and get more involved physically, one of the biggest barriers is this sense that there's only, if you don't do it this well, it's not worth doing, right? There's that minimum barrier kind of thing. And I'm wondering if I'm kind of hoping there's a way to that the approach going forward in sort of the yoga stuff, that we're going to see more of that, not just one right way answer.
I was wondering, students, when they come into limits classes where there's discussion, come in with the assumption that there must be a right answer at the end of this and a right way to speak. And you need to model that there isn't. I'm just trying to think, like a lot of the things that we're bringing up here are making me think back again to regular teaching and how we realize that certain things, but I don't know if we realize how difficult it is for students to see them. So if a student comes into a class and the other students are comfortable with having a discussion, but the others aren't, and they see them happening and they don't see someone struggling who finds a way to do it. Sorry, this is kind of a tangent off of what you were saying, Rebecca, but it just came to my mind. Same with like Twitter chat, for example,
But and see, for me, the types of courses I teach, design, right? How to design online courses. And so I can model that with my students by saying that the course in which you're taking isn't perfect either, right? And I ask for their feedback every week on what they like and don't like about the course, so that they are then reflecting on what works and doesn't work for them, so that and the appreciation that when I give them feedback, they don't have to take it, right? Like, my feedback is just my opinion. It isn't the only opinion.
Mm-hmm. I'll just share with you, when students come into my Sunday morning class, mostly what they find is other students lying on their backs on the ground with bolsters under them, maybe to prop up their back or their shoulders, maybe a bolster under their bent knees, maybe a blanket. Or they might find a student using the wall as a prop and sitting up with their back against the wall for that support. And, we spend about 5 minutes just arriving. And that what happens during that arrival time is really critical to what happens in the next hour that we have together. One of the things that feels a little disjointed for me in the YogaMOOC is that kind of absence of arrival time. You're just sort of all in. We're diving in, and we are diving into yoga philosophy. We're diving into yoga poses. We're diving into ancient yoga texts. And that is just a lot to process in 1 week. And feels a little at odd with just what does it mean to arrive in a yoga class with our bodies, with all of our abilities and limitations, our histories, our expectations. And there's a way in which I think this MOOC really captures the competitive ethos in the United States that has really commodified and rebranded yoga for people who are used to a very fast-paced, quick drive-by kind of experience. A condensed, compressed experience that that is kind of click and go. So that's partly the disconnect that I feel, where there's not a lot of space, even Rebecca, built into the design that allows for the kind of thing that Sherry described, of allowing the students some choice, some opportunity to lead, some opportunity to share and show what they're bringing into the space that might be helpful here. We should start posting, Maha. We should start posting to the discussion board our modification videos or tips.
It's a good point. I actually haven't been in. Maybe there's already people posting that kind of thing that we're posting on Twitter. I just hate the edX environment.
I agree with I hate the edX environment, unfortunately, because I have actually jumped in. I shared the virtually connecting, like this thing, into the edX environment, but the way that it's not a user-friendly environment, especially it's like it's like worse is the bigger the group gets, the less useful the discussion forums in edX become, because things just filter right off of it, and so it's only the last 4 things that you see. Yeah, exactly.
I want to make a little bit of a connection to Sherry's work with young people. 3 days a week, I'm at a school with high school students teaching documentary media making. But they're always really excited to leave the documentary class because what comes next is yoga. And a teacher who also teaches at the same yoga studio I do is also teaching yoga in this high school and at about 15 other schools in our district. And I'm excited about the possibility of the documentary media making students connecting with the yoga students and making a documentary about being yoga students at school and how the practice of mindfulness in yoga can be integrated in their other academic studies. Yoga with kids is really, really fun.
I see we're all nodding, and I see that sort of that natural desire or wish for those opportunities, as you said, for instance, that the idea of arriving, of having, it's not necessarily about the yoga poses, but it's about the larger picture of you know, oh, I'm in a space and I'm you know, how am I in the space? Just the time to explore those very questions, which of course are somehow the sticky ones. It's maybe easier for us to come in and say, okay, all right, I got to do this pose. All right, I've got to get it right. I'm going to do this. I've got to stretch this. But to actually stop and think about, what does it mean to be here? How am I here? How am I present? in order to be able to then actually do the yoga mindfully. It's so fascinating to me to know how I wrote earlier something about this delivery mode, right? This okay, all right, you want yoga? We got yoga. Here you go. Here's your yoga. But that often that critical piece of about being human first in order to be able to do the yoga is often missing, and not just in a virtual environment, but in other environments too. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's the presence that Sherry spoke of. And the idea, my understanding of yoga, is that the poses are not ends in and of themselves. To move into a yoga pose is to hopefully sit or stand in that pose and be present, to observe, here I am, what's arising here in this pose? What's arising for me now in this body, in this pose? And to sit with that rather than what's the next pose going to be? Where am I going to need to get to next? So one recommendation that might be helpful is, if the practice is moving on to the next pose, but you are comfortable where you are, stay there.
Although I had a challenge sort of differently in that it was just too advanced, and a lot of the poses I just couldn't do, right? Or that I held the early poses too long throughout my, because I have very limited strength in my shoulders. And then that meant the next ones didn't, then I couldn't continue. And so I ran into problems later. So it was a cascade failure. But for me, in so many ways, I also have this, and I actually kind of like the body awareness aspect, but I'm acutely aware of how different my body feels in particular yoga poses. Mm-hmm. Right? There are certain ones because parts of my body, I don't have sensation. So laying on my stomach is a particularly awareness-driven position for me. Mm-hmm. And that's, I guess, allowing for that awareness is a good thing in some ways.
I think it comes back to that edge, Rebecca. So awareness of discomfort, or awareness of pain, awareness of just something being unsettled that you need to back away from. Those are really important things to be able to discern. And a yoga teacher can't feel that for you, but a yoga teacher can be perceptive to help you cultivate and connect to that awareness at your own pace, in your own time. The announcement at the beginning of this course that it is that there is no previous yoga experience needed is a big cautionary flag for me. Without those supports.
A cautionary flag as in you got worried that they said that?
I think that it is, I'm not sure how one can make that claim, given how differently experienced and abled and practiced we may be.
Go ahead.
I found that because I'd had experience, I knew to stop.
Right.
And I think that that's sort of where and I couldn't help but thinking in my mind of, if I was one of the people that came into this with no experience, I'd have been disillusioned about 5 minutes into that video and then never would have come back. That's, you know, so I thought of it more from the, you just lost your audience perspective, but not as much from the injury, but I see the worry about injury as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that did sort of raise a flag for me is that they said, if you're experienced in yoga, you'll also benefit from this course. And I thought, if someone who has no experience is in it, how will the person who has a lot of experience benefit as well? There's no reason to cater to everyone unless you're really going to cater to everyone. There could have been a way, I think, to say, if you're a beginner, use this video. If you're more advanced, use that video. And they didn't have to create all the videos from scratch. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's already online, and Laura's promised to send me more stuff. Mm-hmm. I used, when I was pregnant, I used iTunes videos for pregnancy, and I wasn't worried because I was sure if they've done it for pregnancy, it's not going to hurt. But for others, it's a kind of different thing. One of the things I thought was really interesting about what Laura said was that the poses are not an end in themselves. And that's a really, really important place to start. Someone, and I can't remember, I don't know how to pronounce his or her name, Nikru, I think, was talking about, in general, that one of the things they tell us to do at the beginning of the MOOC is to set our goals. And they were saying, I don't think that's where I want to start. I think setting goals can get you into trouble. And sometimes you need to focus on the journey itself and the process rather than a particular end goal, and you never always know where you're going to end up. And I thought that's a very good analogy to curriculum in general. And maybe with sports, sometimes the goals have fun, you know, or to, like, I'm here to sort of try to relax. But if the yoga isn't going to help me relax, it's going to hurt my back and make me more uptight, then maybe I'll just forget about the yoga and just focus on the meditation. But it's much more difficult to meditate when you're in pain. I was trying to meditate during a medical exam yesterday, and the doctor said, stop hyperventilating. I'm like, I'm not hyperventilating. I'm actually trying to breathe deeply here.
In some very traditional yoga teaching, the point of the physical yoga practice is to prepare the body for the meditation, with the recognition that for many new meditators, just the difficulty of sitting still and upright is a barrier to getting practiced enough to begin to experience some of the benefits of meditation, which is one of the reasons that I really like Jon Kabat-Zinn, whose work is referred to in the mindfulness video, because he recommends, because much of his work is done with people in hospital who have a number of limitations in terms of their mobility, is to practice meditation lying down, which seems to me a very gentle invitation to a practice that may otherwise cause physical discomfort that is a barrier and a disincentive for continuing the practice.
You know, and it's fascinating because that was actually discouraged, the laying down for fear of falling asleep. And I actually am like, but I've had fortunate enough to have had some really good restorative yoga to have realized enough about my body that I know that I can only do this in the laying down position, because I can't breathe properly when I'm sitting up, when I'm sitting. And so, but I know that now, sort of like all of those breathing exercises, the nose thing has never in any time worked for me. I've tried it over and over and over again. It just does not work. But I do know what does work for me. I've been able to figure that out. And so I think that that's, yeah, I just, yeah. That's body self-awareness, I think is maybe something that might be good to cultivate.
I did fall asleep once while doing the breathing. That was good because I sleep so poorly and so seldom. I was like, I slept well, I felt well waking up. And why is that a problem? Like, who says I have to meditate for like 10 minutes straight? If it's going to make me feel better to sleep and meditation helps me sleep, it's not a bad thing.
Right. Feels like a little bit similar to teaching writing. And I'm always surprised when students tell me that a prior teacher has told them they can't do this. Or so, for example, they can't use I when they write. And this is always bewildering because if it works and is helpful and opens up the writing process for the students, then I don't think, I hesitate to say there's a right way or a wrong way, in the same way that I would say that there's a right way or a wrong way to position your body in meditation. How are you comfortable? How are you comfortable? What surroundings, what props do you need to be comfortable? So I think, I think Sherry raises just some really great kind of conundrums about this YogaMOOC experiment. And maybe there's not only the longing for some relaxing and some managing of the stress, but maybe also a longing for, at least for me, better metaphors right now in work for the spaces of education that, if there's no space for reflection, then especially those of us who are teaching, if all of that teaching is coming from reaction and a lack of reflection, I'm questioning so much how is that going to shape possibilities for learning.
What just came to mind for me was exactly this notion of, it sounds like it's a series of answers for which the questions are not really posed, or they're not learner questions per se. It's sort of like, here's this program, here, do this. But it doesn't sound like there's the opportunity for learners to pose their own questions, or to wrestle with questions with each other, or to sort of hash those out. So this notion, you cannot cultivate self-awareness, especially in a beginner environment, without some guidance. That has to be built into the pedagogy, that you need to offer a way, an inroad to, how can I think about this? What can I do? And it's not enough to say, do this, go at your own pace. It's not enough to use these phrases that we could be using for anything. I'm thinking actually of the example this past week that Laura Ritchie had people working with string instruments where was it? Somewhere out west, right? But seeing these photos of probably many people who probably maybe have not worked with string instruments before, but they were doing it. They were experimenting. They were being given enough scaffolding to be able to enjoy it. And that was fascinating for me, that kind of experience. So it sounds like I'm super critical of this this MOOC idea, but I have a lot of concerns, especially because it's about physical, and I worry about people exactly injuring themselves with the best intentions of wanting to do the right thing, the good thing, but that has some real risks.
I think though, and it's funny because it wasn't until somebody, I had said it and somebody pulled it up, picked it out when I said it, is like with the idea of it being, there being a right and wrong way to meditate, and the reality of there isn't necessarily a right and wrong. There are just different. And some ways work better for others and some don't. And I think that you know, I don't know, for the longest time I've had a viscerally negative reaction to mindfulness meditation because I hadn't been taught it well. And I had been taught a right and wrong kind of way. And it wasn't until somebody had said, you know, explained the whole idea of it isn't about blank thoughts, it's about non-judgmental thoughts and letting go of the judgment. And so suddenly it was, then I could see the thought bubbles come in and let the thought bubbles go and not have, I'm a very visualization kind of person, but being able to sort of work on that, letting them come and go instead of working, you know, judging myself for not being able to prevent them from coming in the first place, which is what I had been doing previously.
One of the things I've been thinking about, and it's one of the things I would be interested to talk to other people about who consider themselves spiritual in ways that attach to particular religion, is that at the beginning they didn't mention, but later they said you could use a phrase to meditate on, all that kind of thing. And I was just thinking about how you might connect your own belief systems with your meditation so it becomes meaningful in a different way, and then you concentrate on this other thing that has meaning for you that is other than just breathing, even though just concentrating on breathing has been great. But it would feel like, this is very stupid to say, I think, but it would feel like a better use of my time if it was also some kind of other spiritual practice. And I think in different religions there are particular spiritual practices that you could connect it to if you're a religious person. But not everyone who belongs to a religion knows the particular ways that it works in their religion, because it's not necessarily the mainstream way of doing things. So like in Islam, there are Sufis who are more spiritual in their practices and more physical and so on, which is not mainstream Islam. And so in the ways, in a lot of our religious practices, they don't seem like meditation. But I kind of feel like maybe there's a way to connect them. And this is just a general question, not about any particular religion, but just generally to do that. Like when people meditate but they have a religious background, do they find ways to connect them together?
That's certainly been my experience, Maha. And you know, when I think of who have been the most just helpful guides for me in yoga practice and meditation, they have always suggested or invited the possibility that if the purpose of meditation, if one of the goals of meditation is to quiet the mental chatter and cultivate stillness and the space to listen to the quieter sense of self within, that what many people encounter there is whatever that religious experience or that spiritual connection might be. So it might be that in that stillness and quiet, one is more available to hear and to experience those aspects of their religious or spiritual practice at a deeper level. And my experience has always been that the best guides doing that work are not concerned to label it separate from one's religious practice. That it can at its core can be part of the same expression. without, I would say, diluting or homogenizing the very particular religious practices and rituals and ways of being that are maybe distinct for our religions. I don't know, Sherry, if you have other experiences with that.
It's interesting that this notion of the spiritual. I know that there have been moments when I have been at a yoga retreat, or where I felt those moments where my movement was connected to where there was a spiritual aspect, because I'm working in an environment where it's school, and it's that spiritual piece is not present in that sense. However, I do think that there are moments that my students, just the joy that they experience. I mean, there's some real visceral joy that happens on a regular basis, and it's maybe not a spiritual experience, but it is absolutely integral to who they are and who they can be on that day. And that's something that I found as a teacher that I have had to learn to appreciate, because of course, because I am a teacher and I want control and I want things to run according to my plan. But when I can stop and just pause and just sort of say, wow, look at you guys. You are loud because you are so happy. For me, it's about recognizing sort of the spirit within the children, right? Or within, and even in myself. So I think there's that possibility is always there, but our environments, our teaching environments, are there to like head that off at the pass. Like, don't go there. Stick to plan. So yeah.
And I would say that in my experience, Maha, some have resisted the notion that meditation is a spiritual practice comparable to prayer, that resistance sometimes seems rooted in wanting to distinguish between the kind of spiritual dimension one might feel in the presence of children learning joyfully, or women gathered joyfully, or a group gathered in some kind of communal activity, and the joy and celebration, that is distinct from the more internal, inward focused, more practice of the solitude of prayer and meditation. But it is very common in my religious practice, in the temple that I go to, for the rabbi to say, for the next 20 minutes, we're going to spend in silence, choose to meditate or pray or whatever way of communing with however you're recognizing your spirituality. That's what we're going to do. So it's very open.
So I think it's fascinating because we're coming at this from different religious perspectives, and I really do want to bring this up because it sort of came up in the chat a little bit, of sort of how I see in some ways the parallels between the yoga as individual practice and prayer as individual practice versus a yoga class practice, and similar to being a congregational prayer practice, or going to church or going to synagogue or mosque and praying together, right? And how that's different than together. They're both spiritual, though. They're just spiritual in different ways.
I am really grateful for this conversation. It was everything I needed with friends I really love, and it's made me reflect a lot more and sort of also re-energized to just do this the way we want to do it, regardless of how the MOOC is designed. And I think, to be fair to the MOOC designers, it was an ambitious thing to try to do.
I wonder if for some it will encourage them to go out and find a class or find people a teacher.
Yeah, I think that might happen. I mean, I discovered by coincidence that Nadine, who works with Virtually Connecting and works with me in the office, is doing a physical yoga class at the same time as me, and she heard her back at the same time as me. So that's funny. But I haven't been having these conversations with her, so I think we should go and have these conversations that I'm having with you guys and see how she's been feeling with that. I don't have time to go find a yoga class, so I'm going to follow some of the links Laura sent me when back is better and try to do some other stuff. And then get back to Sherry and Laura to work for me.
Well, I want to say thanks for this. I have also so enjoyed this conversation, and I'm glad I made it at the right time because we changed our clocks yesterday. So I was sort of like, oh, okay.
I know it's next weekend. We're changing ours, so it is going to get confusing again.
Good. Okay, so it's just this week that we're kind of like, I'm sort of like, wow, they're only 8 hours away. Oh, that's not okay. But you know, of all the virtual connecting conversations that I've had, this one has felt so very, very, well, obviously it's close to practice, but also gives me a lot of food for thought, and it's been such a wonderful thing to be with all of you, really. Just a joy, and I'm really invigorated. I'm at the end of a vacation, so I'm about to go back to school tomorrow. So this is just the right thing to get back into it. So thank you, everybody.
And I want to thank you guys all as well for jumping in and being willing to come and join us when we threw out that invite. And hopefully we'll have another one next week. And I was going to say same time in the Pacific time zone, but we are daylight savings next week, which means that it will actually be that different time for you guys. And then the week after, it should stabilize, hopefully, with that. And so thank you guys all very much for coming out and joining us. And I'm going to go turn off the live stream.